Olá a todas e todos, um bom dia, ou boa tarde, ou boa noite. Eu tenho muito prazer de começar essa jornada hoje de conferências e debates, depois da conferência de abertura, com a nossa segunda conferência de abertura do professor Tomislav Sola, a quem eu vou apresentar para vocês, primeiro em português, depois em inglês. I'm first going to present Professor Tomislav Sola in Portuguese, and then I'll present him in English for our international audience. O professor Tomislav Sola, então, com quem eu tenho muito prazer de iniciar também, após a Sandra, esse evento, é graduado em História da Arte e Inglês em 1975 pela Universidade do Zagreb, com pós-graduação em Museologia no Zagreb e em Paris, tendo sido orientado por Georges-Henri Rivière. Ele concluiu o seu doutorado e iniciou a sua carreira como curador de museus na Croácia, tornando-se então diretor de museu e professor universitário permanente. Ele foi eleito para 2 mandatos como presidente do Comitê Nacional do ICOFOM da Iugoslávia e organizou diversas conferências junto ao ICOFOM, ao ICTOP e ao CIMAN, tornando-se posteriormente membro do Conselho Executivo do ICOM. Ele foi chefe do Departamento de Ciências da Informação e da Cátedra de Museologia da Universidade do Zagreb, enquanto ensinava intermitentemente em universidades do exterior. Ele fundou o projeto de conferências The Best in Heritage e atualmente trabalha como consultor do patrimônio, desenvolvendo diversos projetos experimentais em museus. Desde que se aposentou da universidade, em 2013, Tomislav Sola continua a escrever e a realizar palestras internacionalmente. Ele foi membro do ICOFOM por muito tempo, como ele mesmo vai dizer na sua fala, na sua conferência, e está há muito tempo afastado desse comitê, há muitos anos ele não faz palestras no ICOFOM, e eu tenho muito prazer, então, de apresentá-lo mais uma vez nesse evento, que é um evento da UNIRIO e é um evento do ICOFOM também, para a nossa audiência. Okay, now in English, Professor Tomislav Sola is graduated in Art History and English in 1975 at the University of Zagreb, with a postdoctorate degree in museology in Zagreb and in Paris, where he was directed by Georges-Henri Rivière. He had his PhD at the University in Zagreb in 1985 and started his career as a museum curator, then becoming a museum director and finally university professor with tenure. He has served 2 mandates as the chairman of ICOM National Committee in Yugoslavia and organized 3 conferences with ICOFOM, ICTOP, and CIMAN, and later became member of the Executive Council of ICOM. He was head of the Department of Information Sciences, held the chair of museology at the University of Zagreb, and has taught intermittently at 5 universities abroad. He has founded and still is chair of the Best in Heritage project of conferences, and currently he works as a museum and heritage consultant and still runs some experiments such as the Global Love Museum. Since retirement from university in 2013, he continued to consult, write, and lecture intermittently. Professor Tomislav Sola was once a member of ICOFOM, and I'm very happy to introduce him once again, after so many years since he hasn't participated in our committee. So, Professor Sola, the floor is yours.
Hello, my dear colleagues. I'm glad to be with you, obviously virtually, as we do traveling today or these days. It was an irresistible call, actually, because I've been absent for ICOFOM for 30 years already, and to many of you I wouldn't be a known face from ICOFOM. But Bruno Brulon was so much charmingly insisting that I come with you. I couldn't resist, indeed, and here I am. It will be a sort of an improvisation of what I'm going to offer you. a collection of slides which took me some time to compose to refer to your theme, which I find very important. And if it will be in a hasty manner what we are going to say, do not worry, because I will post the entire lecture on my website. It'll be accessible anyhow. So thank you in advance for the attention, and let's start, see what we can do together. I thought that the theme for me would be on community decolonization in the age of heritage, because what we are talking about is some sort of changes of response of museums and similar institutions to the challenges of the present world. I think understanding of the world around us is very important, because without it we cannot position ourselves, because the world is our object and also definitely our context. So what I wanted to suggest at the beginning was that we've been always subject to different campaigning, I would say. In the ideological world which we have left, it was known gesture, be it of great democrats or great dictators, whichever, but in post-ideological world, it is the same gesture, but selling obviously different goods. We are in neoliberal reality. It's not an easy one, as we shall see. Curiously enough, Orwell, we knew that he was right, finally arrived, and 1984 is seemingly here. Try to reflect for a brief moment. War is peace. We are on the warring planet. Freedom is slavery. There are real slaves today, fiscal slaves, whatever you say, and it's very curious operation upon human mind and human condition. And one thing amazingly there is that ignorance is at least promoted as strength, which is indeed very curious. I would say that you don't have difficulties recognizing that it concerns us in museums very much. Your question might be rightfully there, can mob think? Or if not, which is probably the answer, who does the thinking? I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories, but obviously there's a huge project behind it, spontaneous or not, concerning us very much, because we are there to make the world better. And how do we do it when knowing what is going on and how awkwardly the things develop around us? Remember, these people, any people, are our visitors. We have to exercise certain influence upon them. We have to offer them some usable knowledge and make them, ennoble them in brief. So who are they? Look at these young people. Can we assist maybe in our museums political and social literacy? Because museums have taken a very comfortable stance, and that is, it's not of our concern. Others are doing it. But if you really dwell into history, if you offer a view upon human endeavor throughout the ages, you will find in any museum much material, much experience to actually offer some responses that can be usable for today. Because what is going on is that democracy has been changed for ochlocracy, rule of the mob, based upon manipulated, seduced and illiterate masses as stage spectacle and very dangerous illusion. Now, how do we stand there? B. Museums. The world is a rather stormy picture today and not offering comfort. So let us see what is happening and again see if that it concerns us and to which extent we can be part of the solution. You know the postmodern syntagm, everything goes. It was sort of a libertarian view and behavior, and in a sense quite charming, but it turned into something very ugly, which is the world without quality, namely nothing matters. So, world without criteria. If I would describe culture or heritage as part of it, with one word I would say criteria. Now, world without criteria seems like a very, very serious problem. We have a moral debacle of neoliberal rule. We have wars and chaos issuing from it. We have also as a consequence insecurity and fear, and gosh, you can really rule anybody when you install insecurity and fear. Add to it pauperization, forming of the class of precariat, those without money, instead of that famous middle class, which was somehow in the way, and oligarchies that take care of everything, obviously behind the scene of this mob rule, if we don't mention it later on. We have uglification and pollution. Our planet is more and more poisonous and more ugly. So just let me dwell for a brief moment. If you say a problem is ugliness, then let's make it a little bit better. Let's at least say to people and prove them that there is a possibility for beauty, and what beauty is. There's loss of quality, and there's finally something horrible to say, even the end of species option. Shall we endure on this planet? There's a karaoke world, which is one way to say the world of amateurs, world without professions and their criteria. We'll return to that. And as I've said, rule of mob, which I think is the final treason of democracy, of the idea of democracy. Now, we don't know where we are, and somebody has to tell us and help us with it. It does concern museums. Only those that are needed among museums will survive well. We're not given. Anybody can make a museum and will do so. So it wasn't forbidden before, but not many people ventured into making their own museums, neither companies nor private persons. And now it seems like why bother with a anyhow poor state? So we can do it ourselves. That means without criteria, without profession behind. That as it is, probably not a profession, as we'll say afterwards. And if you talk about sources of survival and financing, you also talk implicitly about obeying the master, the famous hand that feeds you. And that means no autonomy. So the time for forming a profession may be expiring. A little bit more upon the world. Endless taking, I think, brings misery and rage. What else? To some, maybe richness as well, but there are also other consequences. Refugees come from former colonies and escape from Western wars. No wonder the consequence is that once, like this scene from Brussels, Central Square, No wonder that once very calm places, full of history, tranquil, where tourists are now becoming, or are now considered as dangerous, potentially dangerous places. And by the way, if talking about the free world, there are still 61 colonies or territories, as they are usually called, in the world. And if that is not hypocrisy, what is then? I didn't see that recorded in museums, because we keep aside. We don't want to offer dangerous information, and therefore, if ignored, that's because of that. John Adams, second President of the United States, said at one occasion, there are two ways to conquer and enslave a nation. One is by sword, the other is by debt. Yes, very much so, we would know, but there is a third, by acculturation, and that concerns us in museums very much, by enslavement of mind and spirit. Should we allow it when we recognize it? Do we recognize it at all? So, can museums or public memory institutions help? Cynically, depends upon answer. Do we want better past, using museums to create more of it? Or do we want better present, using the past for quality development? It has become, unfortunately, easier to tell the future than the past. Think about it. The past changes seemingly more often than the future. And are we part of the process? Can we moderate it? Do we curate the history as we should, probably? Worldwide, the past is turned into one of the biggest building sites. I wouldn't like to remind you on all sorts of revisionism, but it's a huge operation on human collective memory. The fact is, we choose our heritage, and values we choose, we actually continue by them, whatever our destiny is. What we continue, in fact, defines us. Museums are very important, as we've learned. Their historical tasks start in a community. I've been writing about it very much to say that museums are far from perfect. And what seemed to be rather belated criticism proved to be still in time, because we tend to think in terms of best museums we know. So often when I would be lecturing some people from very advanced practices or very rich countries with advanced museums, or indeed some very good museums, no matter where they are, would be in a way offended. But let us not forget that whatever we say as theory, no matter how we call it, should concern the entire profession, no matter where it is, where it does its practice. So, the brief history of museums since our eternity does not live here anymore has been published in few languages, even Spanish. I don't want to go into this huge list of imperfections or reminders of imperfections that may return, by the way, if we are not careful. But I would just say one of them was Eurocentrism, sort of cultural colonialism. We are closer to the very theme. And then, just to use the chance not to be too serious all the time, I proposed this caricature that I've done with a friend. That's me with my grandson in a museum where we look at a painting which is representing His Majesty Charles the Decent, an imaginary king, also like all of them ruling by the book of justice and after the peace. But I wanted actually to persuade the caricaturist into showing what was the real situation in some lost reality in the past, which museums usually fail to record. And that was it. I hope you like it. That's the same painting very well, but it's still on in production and still being painted. But that's the real scene as probably it might have looked. We fail to record the real reality, which is lost. I have proposed a reformist manifesto in 1989, as the slide says, of course being inspired by Marx. I'm sorry to mention the old guy, but I think he's very actual in many ways. As he was claiming for philosophers, I'm claiming for museums. Museums have always analyzed the world, whereas the point is how to change it. You will recognize probably the 11th thesis of Feuerbach. What I wanted to add to it is, in fact, we talk about the way how to serve the world towards the harmonious continuity and survival. That said, brings us to possible examples. I will not dwell into them. I will just offer the list of problems on one side, of threats for a certain community, say, and our possible contributions on the other side. If we have political illiteracy, then why don't we educate voters in our museum? Or, as at the end of the list, if we recognize ugliness, why don't we take our art museums firstly as places where we inspire beauty and virtues? And so on and so on. We actually should behave very cybernetically to recognize threats and then respond to them. Sometimes correcting, sometimes adapting, sometimes really countering them. That's one problem among many, obviously, on this planet. Briefly, it's this. Since the early 1990s, almost 20 million of young and ambitious people have left their countries in Eastern Europe to go to the West. Is there any trace of this insidious colonization in museums? Briefly, no. Neither anything about the consequences upon identity and self-appreciation of these countries, of these people, and maybe some traces over there where they come, but I doubt very much. That brings me to a very macro situation which I would like to suggest, not going into the details of it. Modern society is a very important thing because it took us centuries to build it, and it may take just a few decades to demolish it. But when it was formed upon the logic of recognizing threats. So it was the fear of unknown. We invented priests. Well, invention is a very long one. The social chaos, the threat of it, created politicians. The fear of injustice created profession of law practitioners. The fear of diseases create a profession of medical doctors. The insecurity of our buildings, dwellings, roads, communications, created profession of engineers. We were afraid of ignorance, and then scientists and educationists formed their professions. When it's about oblivion and involution, in the sense of redefining constant danger of this disintegration and redefinition of our achievements on the lower level, we should have a new profession, which is public memory heritage curators. We do have, but they are somehow a dismembered army. We museums are part of it, maybe the most communicational and obvious one. There is a healing influence of heritage for community. We could say it leads to consolidation of identity by maintenance of values. Because this is what we are about. We are about values, recognizing them and maintaining them, keeping them alive, those who deserve. We are about defense of concept of quality in the world that suffers lack of quality. We are natural defenders, and we can create very important developmental momentum. That's so much about arguments, are we important or needed. Don't look necessarily at the box office of a museum, but look at the influence on the entire community, which counts. And that's not just money directly. Our future public memory profession is about noble alchemy of turning knowledge into wisdom. Ideally, heritage is wisdom. And this process that you see from this photography of a famous Jewish photographer is, I think, perfectly illustrating this transfer. When about decolonization in the age of heritage, I would say, yes, we talk about the process and also the process in which we change from the age of museums, I would say, into the age of heritage. Look at this part of the history of museums. It's only a view of Leopold's second original exhibit at the Colonial Museum in Brussels that we mentioned before. I wonder always where these figures are now. I suppose they're still in the storage. Good to have them to show how we were and what we thought. And basically to re-question us again, do we think still, at least in some way, the same way? Colonizing nature of museums is probably part of our DNA. I think we were always part of the conquest of other cultures, other territories, countries, nations, other genders, because we were masculine very much, other classes, certainly rich against poor, which were considered unimportant. Other times, fascinated by the past, not present, not future, and against others' values. Curiously, because now we know, certainly, that museums are there to protect diversity. But we all know, in fact, that we cannot decolonize our museum by changing its name, which is good, nor by adjusting the story, or making gifts and keeping the collection as it is. We know that it should go deeper, that we should change our minds, open them, and open our doors literally, for all those who are not visiting our museums and should, and those who would visit them somewhere else where we maybe bequest our collections to. Could museums be next for popular action like this? Hardly likely, because we are well protected by our guards and we have those closed in times improper. But I wouldn't be shocked if we are punished in some way for not changing well enough according to some new consciousness of the nature of human history, which has been always formed around the rich and powerful. The British Museum and other European institutions seek ways to create permanent exhibition, for instance, of looted artifacts in Nigeria. That's laudable, and I think encourages us to think that we are not lost. But that has to be a process to stay, not a process symbolic. This way, we may be really entering the age of heritage as the age of public memory, in which we can influence and correct governing value system, build political and social literacy for quality decision making, and creating public perception of public memory institutions. Because we are part of this changing world, and it is very much up to us how we will understand our world. The age of museums was the age of subduing, of conquest and taking. I suppose we have no difficulties to say that we don't want anymore that age. The age of public memory, or whatever way we call it, is that of recognition, of returning, and of giving. Giving is the clue. Giving back, contributing, sharing, giving away. So we should return what does not belong to us. Return to the places where the collection come from. Why should they be all in the cities if they concern some villages? See if we can reinforce some fragile systems by reinforcing them, by sustaining the value system, which is endangered. We need to be pacemakers to dying hearts of identity. And it's not probably in the cities, but where the problems are. There, somewhere, villages all over the place. And we shouldn't resurrect anything, because this is done by the industry of heritage, entertainment, tourism. Some 200 years ago, heritage was something different, but since then we know that these 200 years were long enough to inspire, but too short to oblige. So why not reform museums? Why not recognize finally that we form a public memory sector and form finally a profession? This is a very challenging ambition. I will not go into this. Handbooks are done on this profession of ours, profession of museums, the time for changed mindset. And just go through this list very quickly, and you will see it's all done, it's all there, except that we should have our own science and our autonomous profession. And it's not there, and it's basically defined upon the level of occupation, not profession yet. There are 5 main reasons for convergence of public memory institutions and forming a profession. We have the same concept, working process, we have the same information and communication technologies. We have the same concept of users that we have to serve, and the mission from the social contract, a mission to accomplish. And if you just have a brief look at all of them, all of a sudden you see that we are connected by the same common denominator, public memory. And I wouldn't go into details, because the picture should say how complex and mighty we are if we recognize the common denominators that we share. unlike occupations, all professions are respected and prosperous. We should have our own science, obligatory education, and look at this: autonomy, ethics, mission, idealist goal. Of course, legislation and license, but this is something which is not there. I've put it here in a frame just to stress that we don't have it well defined at this very level to make us autonomous profession. We are fighting the global battle for survival of diversity. We are all different, but we should be also all equal on all levels, turning dominance into internalization, I hope, creating sort of multipolar world, sort of planetary democracy as the rule of justice, law and equal chances. So my question to you, rhetorical if you wish, can museums or public memory institutions become part of the solution? Because as you see, the riders of apocalypse are seemingly riding, thumping by, and it's not a pleasant world that we are living in. Now, of course, any professor of heritology or mnemosophy is a geek, because I'm not saying anything about museology, because then I would say, I would call probably churchology the science about spiritual ambitions, or would call the science concerning universities and schools some schoolology. We don't need museology, we need more than that. Even that by that name, but still much wider. I propose to you, of course, the website where you can have a glimpse of more to it, I would say, if you wish. But let's go back for a moment to the very beginning. Whenever we are talking about heritage, we are talking about transfer of collective experience. So why bother with so many institutions that are part of the same concerted try of the society to defend itself from oblivion and to construct usable present and future? So you have here the source, which is experience, which is say the right of elders, from which where you derive certain wisdom, not only knowledge. You have the need on the other side, eager to know, and you have the process, which in this painting of Peter Paul Rubens has been beautifully illustrated. I never knew if he was really thinking about museums or public memory institutions when painting it. And I hope we shall have a pleasure of returning to our safe world in which even conferences will be possible. We have one for 2 decades almost in Dubrovnik, the best in heritage, and I hope to see you one day over there. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been a pleasure to be in Brazil with you, at least virtually.